At the heart of this script is Ethan Cole, a 39-year-old rancher whose entire life has been rebuilt around avoidance. 3 years before the story begins, he lost his wife, Margaret, and his 4-year-old son, Thomas. That loss did not just leave him sad, it fundamentally rewired how he interacts with the world. He retreated up the mountain, cut himself off from the valley below, and adopted a strict personal code. Do not get involved, do not get close, do not let anything back into your life that could someday be taken from you. The story makes clear, this was not really living, it was survival. Dressed up as discipline, his cleanliness, his silence, his rigid daily rhythm. With his horses, all of it is framed as scaffolding holding a broken man together. This matters because it establishes the emotional stakes of the entire episode before Rose ever appears. Ethan is not a naturally cold or unfeeling man, he is someone who has trained himself into coldness as a defense mechanism. When he hears the woman's voice on the wind, his first impulse is to talk himself out of investigating. He runs through a mental checklist of reasons. It is probably nothing and not his problem. This internal debate is the story's real hook. Will he stay locked inside the wall he built, or will basic human decency override 3 years of self-protection? The turning point comes almost involuntarily. He was moving before he had made the conscious decision to move. That detail suggests that underneath the hardened exterior, some part of Ethan's original character, the version of him that existed before grief reshaped him, is still alive and still capable of acting on instinct rather than rules. His choice to dismount, approach Rose, and take charge of the situation is the first crack in 3 years of careful isolation. What makes this more than a simple good Samaritan moment is how much internal cost is attached to it. Ethan explicitly reflects on his late wife, Margaret, while deciding how to treat Rose, thinking about how Margaret refused help until it was too late and wondering what might have changed if a stranger had simply stepped in the way he is stepping in now. This is not him rescuing a stranger out of generic heroism, it is him unconsciously trying to correct a mistake he could not fix the first time. His grief and his compassion are tangled together, which gives his actions emotional weight rather than making him a stock silent cowboy archetype. By the end of this opening arc, Ethan has not just helped a woman with a broken wagon, he has taken the first real step back toward being a person who lets life in rather than shutting it out. That is the engine driving the rest of the story. A man who swore off caring is now cautiously and against his own rules caring again. Rose Calloway enters the story at her most vulnerable moment, alone, injured, possibly in early labor, and stranded in the Montana wilderness with a broken wagon and an exhausted horse. Her physical crisis reveals her character quickly and efficiently. She is not portrayed as helpless, she is portrayed as someone who has been forced by circumstance into an impossible situation and has been holding herself together through sheer will. Her first instinct upon seeing Ethan is to check his gun belt, a small but telling detail that shows she is a woman accustomed to assessing danger on the road, someone who has likely had to protect herself for a while. Her backstory deepens the stakes considerably. She is a widow, her husband, William, died of fever only 4 months earlier, and she is 7 months pregnant, traveling alone to reach her sister in Billings because she has no other support system. The script reveals almost as an aside that this is not her first pregnancy. She lost a daughter 2 years earlier who lived only 4 days. This detail recontextualizes everything about her behavior on the trail. Her calm, controlled response to contractions, her refusal to panic, her insistence on pushing forward. Despite pain, all of it reads differently once we understand she has already survived the worst possible outcome once before. She is not naive about what could go wrong, she is terrified, and proceeding anyway, which is a much more powerful character note than simple bravery. Practically, Rose's crisis is what forces Ethan out of his isolation and into action. But she is not merely a plot device. She has agency throughout. She negotiates with Ethan about what to salvage from the wagon. She initially resists being carried on horseback while he walks, and she consciously decides to trust him only after visibly evaluating him. Even in a moment of total physical vulnerability, she is shown thinking clearly, protecting what matters to her: the trunk, the cedar box, her mother-in-law's lantern, and asserting boundaries where she can. The dynamic between her and Ethan develops through small, unforced moments rather than dramatic declarations. The detail that stands out most is her laugh, small, involuntary, genuine in response to his dry joke about his cooking. This settles somewhere in his chest in a place that had been closed for a very long time. That is the story signaling the first real emotional connection between them, born not out of rescue and gratitude dynamics, but out of an unexpected moment of ease. between two people who have both been carrying grief alone. By the time she is settled into the spare room at his ranch, visibly moved that anyone would offer her a safe, clean place to sleep, Rose's arc has shifted from crisis survival to something more vulnerable. The discomfort and disbelief of someone, unused to being cared for, slowly allowing herself to accept help. Her situation is not just what starts the story. It is what forces both characters into genuine, emotional contact for the first time in years. The script's final major beat shifts the story from a quiet survival and connection narrative into something with genre-blending tension, a mystery thread layered underneath the slow burn. Emotional arc. This happens through the reveal of the cedar box Rose refuses to explain when Ethan first finds it in her wagon. Her guarded reaction that it is nothing that concerns anyone but her is a deliberate seed planted, early designed to make the audience curious about what she is protecting and why she is so careful about it even while injured and in pain. The payoff comes later that evening once Rose has eaten, rested, and begun to trust Ethan enough to open up. She reveals that her late husband, William, worked as a land surveyor and had discovered irregularities in land grant documents coming out of the territorial office, specifically false surveys and forged signatures. This is a significant historical detail woven into the fiction. Land fraud during the westward expansion era was a real and a serious issue, often involving corrupt officials profiting off falsified property claims. Grounding Rose's backstory in this kind of fraud adds a layer of realism and higher stakes to what could have otherwise been a simple romantic rescue story. Crucially, William died of illness before he could report what he found, but the implication is that his death may not be the end of the danger. Rose reveals that she believes her wagon wheel did not break by accident. This reframes everything the audience has read up to this point. The accident that stranded her on the trail that forced her into Ethan's path in the first place may have actually been sabotaged by people trying to silence the evidence she is carrying. She is not just fleeing grief and heading toward her sister for comfort. She may also be fleeing people who want the documents in that cedar box destroyed and possibly want her silenced along with them. This revelation does several things structurally. First, it raises the tension for the rest of the story. Ethan's decision to shelter Rose is no longer just an act of compassion toward a stranger in distress. It now potentially puts him in danger too, since anyone hiding land fraud evidence in his spare room becomes his problem as well. Second, it gives Rose a more active, layered role in the narrative rather than positioning her purely as a vulnerable pregnant widow needing rescue. She is also a woman, carrying dangerous knowledge, making conscious choices about who to trust with it. Third, it sets up an obvious source of future conflict. Whoever is behind the land fraud will likely come looking for her, which means the peaceful ranch setting Ethan has built as his emotional safe haven is about to be disrupted by outside forces. The line "the room was very quiet" closing out this section signals that both characters understand the weight of what has just been said. It is not just a personal confession anymore, it is a shared danger. This conspiracy thread elevates the story beyond a straightforward romance and gives the rest of the narrative a reason to escalate, likely pulling Ethan further out of his isolation and into direct conflict on Rose's behalf.